and it's a Poetry Center schedule for the next few weeks. And so Ari Banias is our Mazza writer in residence at the Poetry Center this week, and he's been visiting various classes throughout as a special guest in classes all this week. And then there is today's reading and also the a reading on Saturday at the bookstore called Medicine for Nightmares, which is 3036 24th Street near Harrison and the Mission. Really wonderful cultural space that is doing a lot in the community these days, and we're just really grateful for that space existing. And so I encourage you to get out for that. Next week, we're doing a program that is co-sponsored with the Center for Iranian Diaspora Studies, and that's with the Lebanese poet Zaina Hashem Beck and the Iranian poet Farnaz Fatemi. And so this will be a Wednesday evening, 6 o'clock, at the Poetry Center, which is in the building right over there, the Humanities Building, 512 Humanities. So grab a calendar, and a lot of stuff coming up through the semester. There will be another calendar in November and December. I hope that you all, as you're coming in here, you know, a lot of people came in and then like found their chairs and found their phones and haven't moved beyond that stage. So I hope you are able to wander around after the readings and see some of this really unprecedented show. It's just astounding work. And there is a takeaway from Demian's work, which is over in that far corner on the left of me, your right, and a beautiful poster that you will want to take one home with you and put it up, commemorating the arrival of the homophobes in North America, or what was, you know, became North America. And I also want to acknowledge, you know, we're on the Ramaytush Ohlone land. I say this not out of some weird academic habit, but to get us to keep thinking about what that means, that our history has been taught very badly to us, that many of us do not know and it's been hidden from us, that history. So it's up to us to teach ourselves and to teach one another and to figure out, you know, like, what does it mean to live on usurped space? And especially bearing a history that is persistently erasing that fact. And so we need to be thinking about, you know, what are reparative means that can be undertaken, you know.
Thank you, Steve, and hello to everyone and to those watching us at home. So, let's see. I hate reading from my phone, but it's what we're doing today. When the creditors call, I answer and tell them about my debts to your mind, the dark reds of the carpet, the sun rings pink, and other forms of adoration. Blue underglow on the fly's body, or a blues from an adjacent room. I don't have a favorite Ari poem. Each one is its own remembered universe of a memory, offhandedly addressed to a you, mysteriously both lover and a pomelo. Is it pomelo? Is that how you pronounce it? Pomelo? Okay. And a pomelo thrown up against a window, or an uncertain coin, or water in a fountain. When I read my friend Ari's poetry, my chest both tightens and sighs with familiarity for an existence in a body neither here nor there, one that moves through a day, taking snapshots to be carefully folded and placed in a pocket for that you. Ari Banias is the author of A Symmetry, 2021, winner of the 2021 Publishing Triangle Award for Trans and Gender Variant Literature, and Anybody, both from W.W. Norton. Recent poems have appeared in Beast, Georgia Review, Hyperallergic, The Nation, The New Republic, Triple Canopy, Verse, Washington Square, and the Yale Review. He is the recipient of numerous fellowships and residencies, including at Yaddo, Headlands Center for the Arts, MacDowell, the New York Foundation for the Arts, and the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown. Currently, Ari lives in Chicago, but is right here and about to read for us. Come on up.
Thank you so much, Tati, for that really perceptive and generous introduction. And it's such an honor to be here. It's a real honor to have had the conversations that I've had all week with some of you. It's an honor to read alongside Demian and to be in this space and in this show and in this room with all of you. So I just want to say that, and I want to thank Steve, the Poetry Center, for having me this week, and the curators of the space and all the artists in this space with us. To the God of sobriety. I've got to get as far away as possible from what I know. If that's you doing it, keep unplugging the world. Invite me softly around the back. Show me the jumble of wires and switches, the piling up junk drawer, toothpicks, rubber bands, soy sauce packets, pennies, rumpled napkins, those twisty ties, their future lives. How could I turn back? I've got to get as far away as possible from what I know. Make it so I can't not knock the frame that's always hung there off the wall and find the punched-in hole. That's from my first book, and it felt like a kind of invocation I wanted to open the reading with. I haven't read that poem out loud in at least 5 years. If anyone wants to sit down who's not sitting down right now, there is an empty chair where I was sitting, and you should feel free to grab it. When you look at a fence, do you see the fence? When the slats are cut in the shape of a spear or the shape of a new shoot in spring, can you tell the difference? Your mother puts you in that red and white dress, and there are photos of it. Are you inside the fence? When she sees her cousin brought to the town square among the dead, stacked in the bed of a wagon, she said. When the frantic hummingbird darts in the field of tinsel and the grapevine shimmering, what is it you see? The surface of the water appears undisturbed. When more video evidence is released, a little surveillance device on the seat, mouthing off silently. A fraction of you still believed this could change the outcome, that the outcome can seem other than your life. A single night of back-to-back reality TV. You feel your atoms go by on the logging truck, carrying the strapped-down trunks of massive redwoods throttling north. You see a woman bowing over a trash can repeatedly, and she looks like she prays to, oh, help her. Who made you think that? If no amount of moving through the world with love, when even armies think themselves beautiful, or so you are told. If all the daily errands drown it out, does it have a name? When border agents empty gallons onto the desert floor on camera while smiling, when weighing whether or not to repeat this, what do you consult? Watching red berries on a bush shake and a red robin shit, and the red brake lights of a Prius on a turn. When a low plane combs the birds from their treetops, your thoughts scatter to their familiar positions. If numbed now by emphasis, are you inside it? When fisher folk agree to saw their boats in half for a one-time payment, cash. Green opalescent feathers are green opalescent feathers. Artists who design border wall prototypes are artists who say they leave politics out of it. You trace the shape of those words in your mouth. Red tips of matches, red tips of drought-tolerant succulents, a garden hose coiled on a wooden post continents away. You try to separate pain from its subject. You try to separate yourself from its cause, while a man in cowboy pants declares the greatness of George Bush. You stack electronic gems, one atop the next. And of course, he's a donor. By remaining in the building, you become what the building contains. The joint in a polished oak bench, the exhausted cloth applying the polish. When by fucking so hard, you try to make your body reappear. Are you inside the fence? When you saw your neighbor keeping her head down and wondered if you should keep your head down? You heard your neighbor screaming in the street and knew you should also scream. This poem takes place in a place called Fire Island, which is part of Long Island in New York. And Fire Island has two kind of gay vacation towns that are right next to each other, Cherry Grove and the Pines. And between them is a place called the Sunken Forest. It's a sort of sandy, marshy place that you have to walk through. There's no motorized vehicles allowed on Fire Island, and so in the Sunken Forest is also a place called the Meat Rack, where people cruise and have sex and watch each other have sex, and most of those people are cis gay men. The men, Fire Island Pines. It seems necessary to say, I watch them. It seems necessary, them, this distance between us, how at times it can shrink, then grow with the removal of clothing. Proximity. From here, it seems necessary to say, I didn't join or belong, but there where mouth meets crotch, I did want to, I did walk along the paths, part marsh, part dune, exchange glances. Someone said, how old are you? But I didn't answer him. He's still vivid in only a cowboy hat, combat boots, and trunks. Follow him, gray t-shirt, baseball hat, blue eyes. Shoulders burnt by unending noon, he places his hands on while he works on him. Kindness. Someone says, take out your dick, I want to see it. I lose him on a forking path. I'm standing some yards behind the men who watch the men. We're watching us pose, ass up on a blanket, prowl daily in only a towel. Suppose I could, I can, find a way of walking into their us, the sound of their pleasures, as though it were an ocean. Find a different spot where we do our thing, we too, who are alike. A few crouch to look, but we're positioned just so no one sees exactly the one could imagine. A hole is a hole is a hole is a hole, fanning out to the nameless late afternoon. What isn't there? Isn't there a sweetness to that? So this poem is about pronouns, but not in the way you might expect. And it is also about responsibility, culpability, shifting relations of power, it is also about EU subsidies paid out to Greek farmers in the 1980s. Pronoun study. They paid them to cut their olive trees down. You paid them to cut their olive trees down. We paid them to cut their olive trees down. They paid you to cut your olive trees down. We paid you to cut our olive trees down. They paid you to cut their olive trees down. They paid us to cut our olive trees down. They paid us to cut your olive trees down. We paid you to cut their olive trees down. We paid them to cut your olive trees down. You paid them to cut our olive trees down. You paid us to cut our olive trees down. We paid you to cut your olive trees down. They paid us to cut our olive trees down. Thank you. This is a really old poem. It's probably the oldest poem in my first book. I wrote it in 2007. Who is Ghost? Who is Ghost, the translucent almost, who flotilla is footless, is died and come back, is sheet and ooh is remembered, is ghost is flicking on and off the lights, is brush the shoulder with gauzy touch. Who is whisper in ear, whisper of curtain in and out with breeze, who flash is haze, is gone. Forgotten is ghost, the ones with different names now, the girl they say became a. Who is he who one time got kissed in a field? It was summer, bare ankles dampened by night grass, who was uncurled, is shook out, the candle with 4 matches sunk in its wax. Who any flame is the prairie taken by it, the half-made bed, the half-said word before it folds up into the throat. The first time someone took off your clothes, the clothes themselves is ghost. I love the sound of your snapping because it's sort of like this beautiful wave. So this is the last poem I'll read. It's a California poem, but it takes place in Southern California. Playa Vista. I even love the gnats. Was thinking this as I walked through a marsh marked private property, bordered by a 6-lane road with blocks of new construction, sandy orange, peachish beige condos right in the path of the sunset. Later, I was thinking, I even like this long blonde strand of hair here beside the hotel pool, caught on a rivet, fixed to the plywood lounging platform painted black and faced in wood laminate so as to appear stylish. It's cheap. The wind blows a bit, then settles. The hair flails energetically, then almost vanishes. I count 3 separate hairs, each claimed by a different screw. A single cloud passes over the sun. From another vantage, the cloud would be elsewhere. Gnats and birdsong, ecstatic in the reeds, the lit up LA Fitness sign reflected in the marsh water, white on liquid pink. A duck paddles across and the letters smear. Last finds, facile nest, faintless, it can be some other way, and is. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Ari. Can we give another, is it another round of snaps? I don't know. My name is Leonard Reidelbach. I am an MFA candidate in the School of Art, and I had the pleasure of helping put this exhibition together with the exhibition design program. It's my pleasure today to introduce Demian Dinéyazhi. They're a Portland-based Diné transdisciplinary artist, poet, and curator born in the Zuni Clan's Water Edge and Bitterwater. Their practice is a regurgitation of purported decolonial praxis informed by the overaccumulation and exploitative supremacist nature of hetero cisgendered communities post-colonization. Dinéyazhi's practice interrogates normative spaces by refusing to settle or perform for exploitative galleries and publishers that act as gatekeepers to the lethargic, toxic legacy of Western paradigms. They are a survivor of attempted European genocide, forced assimilation, manipulation, sexual and gender violence, capitalist sabotage, and a hyper-marginalization in a colonized country that refuses to center their politics and philosophies around the indigenous peoples whose land they occupy and refuse to give back. They live in a world, in a post-apocalyptic world, unafraid to fail. We are lucky to have Demian's work, Detach Yourself from the Settler Racist Colonizer Imaginary, included in our powerful and long-awaited show, Beyond Binary, here at the gallery. Please welcome Demian.
Yaddo, my name is Demian Dinéyazhi. I'm born to the clans Nestaje, Tabaha, and Totochitni of the Diné tribe. I live in Portland, Oregon. I'm originally from Gallup, New Mexico. Yeah, sorry, I'm a little like anxious, carsick, hungry, and over-caffeinated. But yeah, thank you, Ari, for your poetry. Thank you, everyone, for organizing the show, putting the show together, all the hands and labor and patience and time and commitment. Originally, I was confronted to do the exhibition prior to the pandemic, and a lot of things, during that time were very uncertain. A lot of my work, as well as other artists' work and poets and people who work in the arts, a lot of our work was, really pushed back, and no one really was certain what was going to happen with anything. So it's nice to have institutions commit to something and to see these things through and provide support and financial support for artists during this time. So thank you very much for doing that. I almost quit making work because of the pandemic and institutions like bullshit during that entire time. But they don't get to dictate how I walk away from it either. So I'm actually gonna read some new work, and then I'm gonna dive into my latest book. So yeah, bear with me. Cocking my head to the east, splintered toward the sun, devouring deadly dying rays of the sun. Hoping for a tan at 35,000 feet, it takes all my willpower not to stretch my fake-ass nails through the simulated gunk to scratch the earth like a love-lorn cat. Could these valleys purr? Could those plateaus get stimulated like goosebumps atop smooth asses, opening up for the cosmic portal of a post-apocalyptic gateway that releases another stanza? We talk about poets who died for their craft, but this generation fucks new poems by ways of by way of silicone douche nozzles, brown popper bottles, ketamine visions, meth ambitions, uninhibited Molly theoreticians, keef-infused sativa pre-rolls, mother's milk dancing like amateur strippers twirling on reflective poles that lead to the scorched ruins of some sociopath's abandoned, simulated delirium of the promised land, polluted with jackknifed billboards of aborted fetuses, propaganda cows, clear channel proclamations that should say, Jesus doesn't give a shit about America, or your guns, or your monster truck cock sleeves that run on desecrated resources aborted from this sacred earth. Something inside me tells me to know when to walk away from the poem. The words backed up amongst the carousel of trauma, and sure enough, as I walk away, I find myself talking to myself, singing to myself, walking through cement pillars the size of a coffin in Berlin, driftwood songs from the night before with TK, Laura Nero, and LaBelle singing The Bells, walking atop the uneven terrain, the tragic and comical dread of the American flag peering out as a reminder of patriotic genocidal propaganda akin to the tireless instinct that fuels the desperate and redundant vibe of invasive species that suppress the sacrality of harmony. Something inside me tells me to walk away from the trauma of the past 2 years and of the last 2.5 years in order to survive, to experience joy again, to fall in love with myself again, in order to create something inside me, tells me to stand, to create something to, Something inside me tells me to walk away from the trauma of the last 2.5 years in order to survive, to experience joy again, to fall in love with myself again, in order to create. Something inside me tells me to stand near the ledge of a cliff or canyon, hundreds of miles above the floor of the earth, to overlook the healing world, in order to witness and listen, in order to reconnect to the cosmic howl of information. All right. So I'm going to read from this book that I put out titled We Left Them Nothing. I began writing it, funny enough, on my way to Fire Island. I was on the boat and having this like moment where I just was looking around and seeing all these like cisgendered white queers, and I was just like, I feel like no part of this, but it's beautiful out here. And I was trying to think about queer history and like trans history as well, especially in the Americas. A lot of, I have this piece in the exhibition, it's a takeaway, but it's titled The Landing of the Homophobes, which is based off of a painting which is centered around the landing of the Pilgrims. And so my work always interrogates and pushes people to think about colonization in the Americas as also being synonymous with a lot of like introductions of trans and homophobic violence. The indigenous peoples in this country are more than 562 distinct tribes. And within that, we all have different ideas about how gender and sexuality functioned within our tribes. It wasn't just one homogenous thing. And so, I hate even using the term sometimes, homophobia or transphobia, because when referring to the introduction of settler colonialism and settler forms of genocide, because there are so many different forms of violence that are through colonization that just interrupted our lifeways. But, for the purposes of English, I've chosen to use that language. So yeah, I was on the boat, thinking, looking, watching the waves, getting a little motion sickness, but kind of like trying to get into it. And I was thinking about Rimbaud and Gertrude Stein and Vonorovich and just realizing, oh, like is this the history we're fighting for? Is this the community that we're fighting for? What does it mean to like fight for like queer and trans inclusion into even our own spaces? And so I started to write this poem. In the new queer America, we post selfies of muscle queens toting shitty performance politics in real time. In the new queer America, we applaud white queers for adopting Black, Indigenous, people of color ideologies without asking how many two-spirit, queer, trans, POC were harmed by their actions in the years leading up to their macro celebrity coronation. In the new queer America, we hashtag our identities and build community through the carry-on of cancel culture. In the new queer America, we appropriate Black culture while living on stolen and colonized Indigenous lands, clenching to political movements nurtured by trans women of color. In the new queer America, we get married and pay our dues to the state. In the new queer America, we board boats, planes, and cars destined for escape, but there is no Rimbaud, there is no Oscar Wilde or Gertrude Stein, there is no Vonorovich, Herring, or Sontag. There is no where there. And what about trans, queer, and two-spirit martyrs of color never embraced by white queers until our struggles and legacies are on trend and used as marketing tools to validate appropriative agendas that manufacture neo-colonial, neoliberal, neo-sloppy queer politics with no gag reflex, their names falling off parched slips like Netflix synopsises, Twitter posts, fuckboys, load counts, white CDs looking for BBC as two-spirit, queer, trans POC are murdered, trying to find the ladder to the gay, white promised land of it gets better. In the new queer America, hope is a recipe for gentrification and artificial liberation because the bombs still get dropped in the name of democratic incompetence, striving for self-determination, religious freedom, or good old-fashioned peace, liberty, and the pursuit of endless consumption. In the new queer America, pleasure and dispensability are an all-you-can-eat buffet during the threat of multiple plagues. In the new queer America, there is no sanctuary. In the new queer America, we zoom into the horizon with 2 fingers and scroll through the declining geography of the Anthropocene until we retreat to safer spaces that absolve us from responsibility. In the new queer America, it's easy to mistake homo-nationalism for homonormativity, for rainbow flags designed by white queers. In the new queer America, New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago are no longer destinations for community, safety, culture, visibility, survivability, streaming, or evolving political imaginaries. In the new queer America, we are tricked into believing that our desire is based on white queer insecurity and failure. In the new queer America, they hunt down coyote and skin the sacred animal alive and adorn their art galleries, living rooms, and bodies with the carnage without seeking consent. In the new queer America, we invent language and theory inherited from the energy of previous generations that fought, died, or were murdered trying to secure their rights so we could one day thrive in this future world we are destined to liberate. In the new queer America, we exist as futurisms thriving at the convergence of multiple histories and stories that are deadly forces against colonial capitalist scum. In the new queer America, you do your research before you show up in our comment section. In the new queer America, tomorrow is a luxury that breeders take for granted, and so their language and concepts are as limited as their strategies of coercion and assimilation that lean toward appropriation, violence, and death. In the new queer America, disabled, marginalized, oppressed, melanin, and immunocompromised radiant bodies existing on a genderless queer planet are a threat to the powers that be. In the new queer America, our existence is an affirmation of our power, beauty, and proximity to sacred cosmology. In the new queer America, you pay us for surviving in spite of all the cards being stacked against us. Venmo at Demian Dinéyazhi. In the new queer America, I close the screen to my phone and place it between my legs, and when I take it out, my reflection stares back at me. The oils of my body appear on the screen, and the hair on my leg create a momentary monoprint of my body aged 35. In the new queer America, we fall asleep with our hands gripping cell phones, waiting for a connection. Decay is human, to rot is to evolve, to disintegrate is to decolonize. Eyes on the sun, shining heels, gray, overcast background, outcast memory, distorted sound machine, distorted asphalt rhythm, sunflower forgiveness, distorted memory, sunflower madness, sun, soon assuming the sun, soon the sour, exhuming the sun sooner than power, soon the sun, monsoon cower, exhume the flower, distorted sunflower, soon power assumes the cower, if not the sun spreads fecund and flower, mile marker 241, like what the fuck, eyes on the memory, now an ancestor, now an oral tradition, now a victory against cis heterosupremacy, eyes on the road, eyes exhume the memory, eyes on the pinprick where the sun rises, not there where it sets, instead of the flatness of normative flat earth, toxic masculinity, instead of the suffocating city, suffocating prism, suffocating land held hostage, confined to a prison, land held back, land back against the border, land back against the wall, land knee scraping against asphalt, land back to the safety of ancestral, land back to the Chiji womb, birthing rainbows, genderless, cosmic plateau, mother fucking earth, daddy fucking bombs, machine guns, parasitic corpse of the city, suffocating sun, suffocating city, suffocating flower, suffocating city, suffocating memory, suffocating nostalgia, now becomes ritual, now becomes hydration, now becomes rainfall through wooded trees, away from the shit city. Shit now becomes nutrient, now becomes no service, now becomes matrix unplugged, now becomes extractive threat, now the sky becomes clouds of sheep fat, and the highway is down to fuck between runaway towns and failed industries, colonized institutions, and detailed gentrification. Now the memory becomes blood sausage, flies swarming around bloody earth, and the earth becomes child's laughter, chizzy elbows and chizzy love, lights driving in the holy fuck of night, might be sublime, might be drunk suspicion, might be the last song she heard, and anxious star formations, constellations submit to memorize betrayal, and the truth smears like chizzy knees against distorted asphalt, pebbles asteroid their way into your skin, and the sun rises like a black hole, exposing the sacred clit. The United States isn't a community. The United States is an individual. The United States is an other. The United States is me first. The United States is a contest battlefield conceived by broken and exiled men of yore, where the rich have fooled citizens into believing that getting them richer thereby grants them power to wield over starving and neglected neighbors. They create self-worth hierarchies based around homophobia, transphobia, ableism, ageism, fatphobia, racism, classism, and fear, anything to reject their own artificial humanity, anything to refuse their own evolutionary growth, anything to shatter their heartbreaking, their breathtaking reflection. They defile sacred elements that traveled light years beyond human conceptions of time. They denounce the very universe that grants them access to witness the raw beauty of chaos and chance encounters. The United States doesn't have to be an asteroid or comet to have an ending. And I discover no doctrine, and I manifest no destiny, and I witness no victory, and I picture no army, and I recall no memory, and I mimic no hero, and I forgo all history, and I extract every America, and I porous all confliction, and I insert no penitentiary, and I pray no dementia, and I baptize no forced entry, and I need no power, and I elect no mayonnaise, and I corrupt no stem cell, and I season no tragedy, and I project respect no Achilles, and I surrender all shortcuts, and I sabotage all illusion, and I master no subservience, and I surveil no garden, and I Bluetooth no invasion, and I exist all ancestors, and I resist no asteroid, and I validate no diagnosis, and I condone no structure, and I damn no gravitational pull, and I trust no colonizer, and I cock block all clockwork, and I dishonor all conquest, and I manage no latitude, and I hologram all nature. This will be the last section of this poem. I have like 3 copies available if anyone is interested in buying it. I wrote this piece after my oldest niece's Kinalda. The Kinalda is like a ceremony for puberty for the Diné people. So a lot of women come together to, make sure that they are coming into womanhood in a good way. The same thing happens for male puberty ceremonies as well. But for this one, I kind of wanted to read it, or I kind of wanted to write it and participate in it as someone who, is working within like a non-binary framework. And so I tried to include myself within a lot of the ceremonial activities. And really just asked, some of the medicine people and people who were helping to facilitate the ceremony, what I could participate in, which was really nice because, I was able to like stir the cake and put everything together. Fresh out of ceremony, holy as fuck, sun rose from the east like inflammation igniting the horizon, turning an abstract half-hearted cloud lavender or lilac. Sultry sky gestures sanctuary in the background like insurance, like reassurance, like vigilant resilience. The sand body of the earth in a dried up wash was soft and dreamy like Joan arbitrating singing down to 0 8 years before my birth. 8 years before my divine reunion with solar flares, holding back tears of disbelief in the belly of reacquaintance. Herds of cumulus clouds, bare-assed in the heavens, proclaiming bare-assed testaments that transitions are sacred and migrations are blessed, passages of revival. The sunrise is a Polaroid of a thought, an affirmation more than a mystery, a relative more than a repetitive astronomical event. Fresh out of ceremony after the wind kicked up miniature sandstorms, but the fire kept burning. The Taradine kicked back. The messenger left well-fed. Medicine songs reconstruct our future again and again. What a relief that one day the earth will awaken, healed from apocalyptic fanaticism. What a relief that one day all of our poems will eventually burn in the furnace of the unknown. Thank you.
Thank you, Demian. Thank you, Ari. We have a few minutes left, and if people want to bring any questions to the poets, that would be welcome. There is a microphone right there in the second row, and so if you could use that mic. And but if anybody has questions for the poets, you're really welcome to bring them now. Yeah. So. Well, please see the show and thank you all for your presence today. It meant a lot to have a full house here. Oh, Will has a question. Okay, great.
Thank you both so much for that absolutely wonderful reading. And I was just wondering if, since there was a similarity in you both talking about Fire Island, maybe if you could talk a little bit about that experience since it's uniting some parts of the poem. I'd love to hear that.
First off, how many people have made the journey out to Fire Island out here? One? All right, do you want to?
It's a journey.
It is.
Requiring at least probably like 3 to 4 forms of transportation, some of them public, some of them private, but like subway to Long Island Railroad to shuttle bus to ferry boat, pretty much. Unless you have a car and you can kind of like skip over some of it, but multiple hours from we're talking from like Brooklyn or something. Did you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I usually drive.
But you still have to take the ferry.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
still a long drive. I almost got stuck there once, but yeah, I went there because a lot of my friends who are cisgender queers, even like queers of color, have gone out there, and so I've always just been really curious about the space and the setting and the history of it. They have a artist residency. They have a couple residencies on Fire Island itself. I've applied to one. I think just within I was curious in it within the queer history of it, what that meant. I was also curious about the meat rack and cruising. I live out in Portland, and there's a couple of nude beaches out there where you can also cruise, and so I'm curious in visiting these spaces, like what the land or ancestors of that space are trying to tell me, or what energy I can tap into while I'm there. And so I think a lot of these spaces that have a very strong sexual energy related to them, even if they're from people who might be racist or transphobic, I'm really curious about what that history is and what it means to inhabit these spaces after the AIDS epidemic. It's just a really interesting part of our history, and I as much as cruising culture is really weird nowadays, I still think that it's queers and people of color are really strong with coding and figuring out how to do what we need to in order to survive, what we need to in order to find pleasure and joy with one another. And so it's important that these spaces exist. I don't know, did you want to add anything to it?
I love what you just said, and I second all of it. And I think, with online, whatever, apps and stuff like that and cruising in that way, these spaces are even, they're shrinking or they're disappearing or whatever. And that there's something, also important about finding ways into them, or kind of I don't know about the word reclaiming, but, I found my way into that space, and I found a way to make it temporarily feel like a space of pleasure also for myself, at the same time that I also felt excluded, and I think that when we just turn away completely, then that inclusion is not just for me, that's all
I also want to add, though, too, that as important as these spaces are, they're very privileged spaces, even if there is forms of violence and assault that happen. And as interested as I am in exploring these spaces, at the same time I realize that trans people are being murdered at a high rate, and that trans people can't go out in public with necessarily the same amount of safety. And so while I applaud these spaces existing, I also wish that more, cis queers of, in general, just build to create spaces that are inclusionary of trans people, non-binary people, and two-spirit people. It's not just, queer folks' responsibility, it's everyone's responsibility. It's a larger issue that needs to be observed and respected. Yeah.
Sorry. So it's a little bit of a personal question for both a lot of us are attacked for being, you know, queer or trans and whatever, but there's also a lot of issues within our own community where a lot of others tell us that we're not queer enough. So I was just wondering how you both feel with that.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think I'm old. Like, I don't feel like I'm queer enough, you know? Like, and that's fine. Like, it's totally fine. But also, I totally am, you know?
Yeah, I don't know. I live in Portland, and so everyone's very queer, and Portland gets a lot of shit, and is getting a lot of shit right now. In general, you know, I was just texting with my partner this morning, and they said that, you know, there was a police shootout like just down the street from where we live, and so I always, you know, I'm from Gallup, New Mexico. I was just in Gallup. I was just on the res, and you know, this past weekend was around this like experimental indigenous music festival that takes place, and you know, normally when I go back to the res or Gallup, I feel very like seen or surveilled. You know, a lot of like indigenous people in the region like don't look at each other and don't make eye contact with one another, or don't make eye contact with, you know, white people, or you know, like the tension in a lot of these spaces, in border town spaces, is like really strong and excruciating sometimes. And so I left because I didn't feel that it was like safe enough for me to be there, to exist. I would disappear, or you know, something else devastating would happen. And so, you know, I left the res and the border town and moved to Portland, and suddenly I felt I could be, you know, queer, be anything that I wanted to be. I felt that I could be seen, and that for the most part things were safe, but then I was always being excluded because of racial issues, you know? So I get that. I get the like tension of like not being able to be in certain spaces, or feel that you're queer enough, or even when you are queer enough, not feeling that you're included in conversations, but then also seeing the opposite side of it and being like, okay, well, if I am in these spaces, and if I am queer enough, and if I am fuckable, like, what does it mean to be sexualized as like an indigenous person? Like, what does desire mean within like a colonial state? And so I try not to like get those things too mixed up, you know, because I think like hetero communities also just over-sexualize queer people, and make you know, who we are all about like who we're fucking or how we're getting pleasure. And at this point, you know, I think after the pandemic and just where we're at, like, you know, I've tried to turn all my energy into thinking more about like how, like what it means to be a human being during, you know, climate change and like the, you know, evolving political or disintegrating political landscape that we're like walking in right now. But also, you know, trying to like be mindful of like the beauty that's in that as well. Cause, you know, while all this is happening, like the earth is still in transition. Like, regardless if we survive it or not, like the earth is like still transitioning and like doing its like queer trans shit, you know? So, I don't know if that's helpful or if that answered your question, but like, yeah, anyway, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, the earth is definitely queer enough.
Yeah.
Hello. I've been like trying to actively be an ally for like the past 10 years, and I did hear like strong notes coming through of your work about how the queer space has been largely dominated by white cis men. And I only recently, even though trying my best efforts, found out about Two-Spirit. And I was wondering
Well, I don't identify as Two-Spirit, but Two-Spirit is kind of a term that was coined, I believe, in the Bay Area in the late 80s. And it's an umbrella term that is used to, again, speak to the complexities of the various types of gender and sexual diversity that exists within indigenous tribes. So I think, that's kind of there was a time when like the male and female sexes like had like stupid drama, and so they lived apart for a long time, and there was all this disharmony that resulted from it, and it was up to the Nagli, who are the Nagli and the Naglihi, who within our tribe, to bring them back together and recreate harmony, and so I think this also just has a lot of ties again to, what am I trying to say? Anyway, I think, like there's an obvious sort of like relationship and long history of like trans people within societies at large and in general. And within that, there's a lot of like balance and harmony and bringing, peoples back together again. I don't think it's necessarily a mistake that, a lot of queer and trans violence happens while simultaneously, the settler colonial state is dissolving and panicking and everything is like up in the air and about to turn to shit. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But that's kind of what Two-Spirit is. I can't speak to it necessarily as strongly because I don't identify as Two-Spirit. I try to identify within my own tribal traditions. Sorry. Do not give me a microphone.
Why? No.
Yeah, thank you.
Sit down and see the show.
Can I give you a hug? Yeah.
Giving me goosebumps. And I would love a copy of your book, but I also, if like students, if you want to like prioritize them, I understand. But consider me an interested buyer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. What's that? Oh, yeah.